Hi, everyone. Today we are joined by Donald Knight. I have the pleasure of speaking to someone who is a really great speaker, has a lot of great wisdom to share. He currently serves as the Chief People Officer of Greenhouse, has been in that role for about a year and a half, and prior to that has spent much of his career in people leadership and human resource positions. So we are very lucky to have him with us today. We'll cover a number of topics, including sort of how he describes his role as a commercially focused people leader. So, welcome, Donald.
Serena, thank you for having me. I'm super excited for this conversation.
Fantastic. Well, let's start off with sort of your journey to your current role at Greenhouse. What ultimately brought you into this role?
Yeah, I think there's a few things I would say that brought me here. I think the first one I would say is I recognize that throughout my career, I've benefited from so many people that have like made deposits into my life. And many of them have been phenomenal CHROs or other business leaders. And so I would be remiss if I did not give those folks their credit for really making meaningful deposits into who I am and helping mold and shape my leadership. I think the second thing I would say is I have phenomenal parents who have
Hmm.
um, really driven discipline into who I am and like this thought process of like servant leadership. They both served in the U.S. Army, so that helped grow me. And through a global lens, like we moved around so much, and by the age of 14, had lived in 6 states, 3 countries, and so that in itself taught me the importance of people. And then I think the last two things I would say is just like exposure, having leaders that would take time to like expose me to different opportunities and help me grow my own bandwidth and capacity. Um, and then the fourth one I would say is a phenomenal email from our CEO, Daniel Chait, who I was at dinner with my wife. I thought it was a phishing attack because I was like, there's no way he knows my personal email. And long story short, the next day I go to follow up with him to let him know, hey, this is like a phishing attack. I go to do some research on who he was and found out, no, he was actually the CEO of Greenhouse. Uh, and the rest is history. We've been creating impact ever since that day. So that's been like my journey here. And I try to, when I share with other people, it's like, it's not a linear trajectory. Um, Many of my growth opportunities and learnings have been moving up and across the business. And so, if for those listeners that may be listening and you're wondering, like, how are you going to get to that desired finish line or career goal that you have for yourself, don't overlook the opportunity of climbing the lattice. Because I know a lot of people talk about climbing the ladder, but it's the lattice that has been very impactful in helping me get to where I am today.
Hmm. I think that's really good advice for anyone listening, and also a very hopeful message. How did you, so in climbing the lattice, sort of when and how did you figure out this area of work was the right calling for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the first person who exposed me to becoming the impact that people teams or HR teams could create was really two people, Diane Harris and Kay Kennedy. And Diane exposed me to the importance of labor relations and really doing like collective bargaining and unfair labor practices while I was an undergrad. Like I was interning for her. Um, and when I went to graduate, um, the head of HR, Kay Kennedy, was like, "Hey, I think you have a future in HR." And I'm like, "No, there's no way. Like people don't even like HR. Like the business looks doesn't they don't like talking to HR professionals because often it's like this compliance driven, here's the rules, no flexibility, where's the agility?" Um, and like the business typically would run away when HR people would show up. So I'm like, I don't want to do that. Like I want to go to be a business attorney and like corporate counsel. Um, but between Kay and my wife Ashley, they kind of like convinced me that there was an opportunity for me to really be present in my son's life. We were expecting my son, um, and Ashley was like, "Hey, you could be present as opposed to like shoot off and like go." I was gonna go to the Marines and be judge advocate general and let them pay for law school. Um, but my wife was really convincing in the sense that she said, "Hey, like, look, you have a niche with people. Like, you connect with people very, very well, and like, what's the worst that can happen? Like, You spend a year, you spend 2 years doing this, you get quality time with our son, you find out this isn't for you. Law school's never going anywhere. And I think that framing for me, I've benefited from people who have framed their perspective or got me to pivot on my own. And so that has been like really the foundation for me getting my initial exposure.
Hmm.
And so I went to grad school and then focused on concentration in human resource management. And I had a professor, Dr. Lee, who told me, hey, no, you need to go get business experience. Because if you don't want to be like all of the other people professionals that you've seen, like you got to be able to speak the language. And what he said was like all these people in HR want a seat at the table, but they don't recognize it's like what you know that creates the impact in that room. It's not the seat. The
Hmm.
seat is not what's important. It's the impact you can make. So I ran a sales team straight out of grad school for 3.5 years. And by far, that has been the most important thing in helping shape my commercial lens. Because what I found is like I didn't like my business partners all the time because they weren't helping me like accelerate the growth of the business. They weren't focused on like how do I retain top salespeople or how do I redesign their commissions and things of that nature. So I've tried to like keep that front and center for me on the people team, which is like when my chief revenue officer or like my head of product or like um, my chief marketing officer, when they think about me, I want them to say that Donald was an accelerator to my business, that the people team was an accelerator to my business, that they allowed us to move with a certain level of velocity when it came to finding talent and growing talent and developing talent. And it really stems from like those experiences I had when I was in the business. And so I think it all starts with hiring, and I feel like the people team could be a huge catalyst to the growth in revenue and profit generation that an organization can have. So I try to keep that commercial lens with me all the time.
It's so awesome to hear your journey included sort of arriving in a really influential position, leading people teams in the people organization where you are, but that one of the most impactful experiences you had was sort of doing work in other areas of the business. Is that something that you would recommend to people who want to have influential roles within HR and people teams?
Yeah, first of all, I think going into sales should be required for everybody in professional life.
I agree with you.
Uh, I think I can tell people who have spent time in sales and had to essentially,
Mhm.
um, had to go work and grind and do business development. I The folks that have had that level of experience I have found have been more well-rounded in their leadership. um, because I think that they can empathize with people in other parts of the business because they understand what that struggle might have felt like when you're literally having to grow your own book of business. I think
Yeah.
the other thing I would say for people teams, yes, I think all people teams should do rotation programs for their for people on their team to go spend time in the business because it changes your perspective when you have to sit on in a different seat around the table trying to figure out like, hey, I gotta grow my CS organization, or I have to grow my product organization, or talking to software engineers and realizing like they're constantly coveted and there's like tons of people that want them to work for their organization. So how do you make sure that you don't give them special treatment, but you still find ways to do what I consider white glove treatment or VIP treatment for the business? Like, and so, yeah, I think that would be huge. And for me, I think, Serena, it all again starts with hiring. It's like,
Yeah.
there's so many amazing, talented people on this planet. There's 7 billion people on this planet. And I try to always look at it as every organization wants the same type of talent I want, which is like people that know how to treat people nicely, people who wake up every morning trying to create meaningful impact, and people that enjoy collaborating and winning. And if you deduce it to those three things, it's like from a people team perspective, we are the biggest gatekeeper to revenue and growth for an organization. And so trying to figure out how do we maintain that commercial edge that allows us to go, win amazing people for the organization to help unlock the full potential of the business. That has to be center in everything that we do. And so when we review policy or we eliminate policy, it's through that lens.
It's a really great way of putting it. So, how would you, not all chief people officer roles have the same area or even depth and breadth of responsibility? How do you define your role as a chief people officer today? And I know that specifically, I know that you have an internal focus as well as an external commercializing focus, as you've mentioned before. How do you describe all those aspects of your role?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it first starts internally,
Yeah.
right? Like my role, I get to wake up every day and figure out how do I eliminate barriers for people at Greenhouse, any barriers to success that they have.
Hmm.
And in many ways, those barriers are not um, work related. Like I'm under the belief that, if you want to improve somebody's work life, improve their home life. So like if women at Greenhouse don't have to worry about if they're being paid equal pay, they can focus on the business because they don't have to worry about how do I go advocate for myself because the business is treating me unfairly. If parents at our organization or caregivers at our organization don't have to worry about meetings starting at 6 a.m., 7 a.m., because they're caregiving either for their children or for their loved ones, I think that allows them this flexibility in this space that says, oh, I can focus on the business because the business is giving me flexibility. So like eliminating barriers for people. So I'll give you an example of that. It's like we started this thing called the Global Passport Program,
Hmm.
which allows 100% of all Greenhouse employees to work from just about anywhere for 60 days. Um, and they don't have to take PTO. They have to get it approved because there are certain countries that we don't want them to go to just because we don't want to put them in harm's way. Like it's probably not an ideal time to go to Ukraine or Russia right now. So they have to be approved countries. But we've had people like literally shoot vlogs and send voice notes to our executive team talking about, hey, I haven't been able to see my parents in like 4 years because of the pandemic, and they're not eligible to travel because they're prioritizing their health and like you know PTO. If I'm taking PTO, like my kids, like they have to pull them out of school, and so Global Passport allows them to have one parent or guardian at home and the other one gets to go prioritize that time. We've also had people say, look, I really want to study other languages and get connected with other cultures. And so, they've spent more time in places like Costa Rica or Ecuador. And we have a young lady right now on my team who's in San Sebastian, Spain. And so like being able to see us remove this barrier, how do you immerse yourself in culture, or if you spend more time with loved ones without burning PTO. It's like those are the kind of barriers that I hope to like eliminate. I think the other thing is like, how do I be an accelerator to their growth? I recognize, like, I think it's Reid Hoffman from LinkedIn that says, these are like tours of duty.
Hmm.
And so, like, when people are here, I really want them to do the best work of their lives. And guess what? I consider it an honor when they grow into a role outside of Greenhouse. Like, that's amazing. Now we get to like export our culture to other locations, and hopefully those companies can also be more people first. So um, that's really what I get to do every day internally. And then externally, yeah, it's like helping provide like this thought leadership around, some of our wins, but more importantly, some of our blunders, like some of the things that we've absolutely messed up on and we've had to like learn. And I think like celebrating failure, not for failure's sake, but creating space for people to know that you don't have to be perfect, um, I think is important, especially in this profession, because often everybody has an opinion on people teams and people policies and people practices. And so there's like this heightened bar that we have to be perfect all the time. And I tell my team all the time, like, I want us to demonstrate excellence, but if demonstrating excellence means, we get it 85% right, and then we have to go fix the 15% later, fine, I'm okay with that. Like, we'll figure that out. And so helping other teams understand what that looked like. And I think the biggest thing that we've been trying to help people with is like inclusion. Like we believe inclusion is an output. So the inputs are diversity, equity, and allyship. And that's been very dear to me because like I have a younger sister. And so she holds me accountable for making sure that we're changing the way that women are treated in the workplace and that we're impacting policies like equal pay. Like that's big. She holds me accountable for it. When I leave the office, I can guarantee you that my sister is willing to call me or around the Thanksgiving table, ask me what have I done for women in the workplace lately. So yeah.
Nice. Nice. Um, What would you point to? I mean, you've been in your role for almost a year and a half, so not a ton of time, but maybe it feels like a lifetime, I'm not sure. What would you point to as kind of the biggest strategic either changes, challenges, or decisions that you've made since joining, and why? Why were they so important to take on?
Yeah. Well, let's first look at the crisis that we've had to face, right? So we've had the slowing down of the economy. We've seen major banking institutions be completely disrupted, like SVB. We've seen tons of layoffs happen all around us. Um, so I think the amount of crisis that we've seen has really formed like this thought process that we need to be leading with empathy
Hmm.
inside of the organization, and really creating space for people to process. So often I feel like there's so many things that happen outside of our company that influence the people inside of our company, and if we don't create space for them to process, like I think that's a huge miss on our end. So I think that's the first one, is like the importance of empathy and vulnerability in the workplace. And I think those are skills that, leaders 20, 30, 40 years ago would have probably frowned upon. Um, but I believe it's the empathy and vulnerability that has allowed us to retain some amazing people at Greenhouse, and equally be able to roll out some of the strategic programs and practices that we've done. I think the second thing I would say is we built a talent planning and acquisition team. So
Hmm.
not focused just on the acquisition of talent, but how do you plan for them? Like, how do you make sure that this environment is conducive for their arrival? And like, what does that look like as far as making sure that they have the tools to succeed, and recognizing that the tools for Serena may be different for the tools for Donald, right? Um, and so like seeing my head of TPNA, seeing her like embrace that, um, I think has been huge. And then the last one I would say is like the importance of people experience. We built a people experience team that we have
Hmm.
now like somewhat like integrated in other teams as opposed to having as a standalone team. But the
Hmm.
importance of like, how do you bring people together in meaningful ways? And like at each of our experiences that we have at Greenhouse, the idea is to teach them allyship behaviors. And so teaching them, how do you invite others? How do you engage others? How do you empower others? How do you champion others from different backgrounds? I have found like that has made it easier for people to cross collaborate, cross
Hmm.
functionally, because they know how to like tailor their messaging or tailor their collaboration or tailor their leadership differently, as opposed to only just being one track minded. Like I think it was Kim Blanchard that talked about the importance of situational leadership. And so like trying to teach those behaviors internally has been huge. Um, but those are the things like to me that really stick. I think if you're talking to greenies, they're going to talk about Global Passport. They're going to talk about our sabbatical program that we rehashed. Best in Tech, 4 weeks of sabbatical every 4 years. I think that's what they'll point to. They'll point to the fact that um, we don't talk about benefits; we call them essentials.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
making sure that people have all of the essentials to thrive. And there's a plan that we have at Greenhouse that allows for 100% of their essentials to be covered by Greenhouse. And so one of the first things I hear when people like grow into another role is they're like, I'm so happy for this growth. I'm going to miss Greenhouse, but now I got to pay for my benefits. I was like, yeah, it's
You
unfortunate.
call them benefits again.
But yeah, I think those are the things that Greenhouse would probably talk about. Um,
Hmm.
and if you're talking to like our revenue organization, like I try to make sure that uh, we're in a unique space where it's hiring software, right? So many of my friends are actual customers of Greenhouse. And so being able to provide like thought leadership with them and do collaboration with them on like panels or thought discussions or amazing podcasts like this one, like that's been like the joy that I've enjoyed externally, because it's we get to help change the narrative and the messaging around how they treat people in the workplace, and like the importance of the people team inside the business. So
It's really powerful. The so I know that you said that part of the reason that you ended up at Greenhouse was as a result of sort of a serendipitous evening and email that you received from the CEO. How did you know that you were joining a company that was up for really prioritizing being people first, and that would be open to some of the changes that you were interested in driving, to push on and accelerate the culture inside of the company?
Yeah, that's a great question, Serena. I think there's only so much of a glimpse into the culture that you get through the interview process. Um, and I think so often the interview process is one way, where it's like companies and leaders evaluating candidates. And for your listeners, I would encourage them that it should be a two-way process. The interview process is a way for you to like pressure test, does the company actually live up to their values? Do they match the principles that you're looking for when you are choosing what company you want to park your time, talent, and treasure? And I think for me, when I started pressure testing through my process, um, Greenhouse lived up to the expectation. I also did some due diligence because I happened to know some folks that were customers of Greenhouse. Um, and they weren't new to me. Like I was very familiar with the organization, but I wanted to find out, like, from a customer experience perspective, do they prioritize you?
Mm.
Is it when you reach out to the organization, what does that look like? Do they have a bias towards action? um, do they compromise their values after you sign on the dotted line as a contract? And to me, that's what, like, the things that allow me to really um, validate that I was willing to take the leap, if you will, to join the organization. And like I told you earlier, there's been so many outside crises, right? So it hasn't been a straight road since I've been here. It hasn't been all sunshine since I've been here. But the things that I find joy in knowing is that um, I have collaborators and peers that um, we're committed to making sure that we do the best things. So, like, when I'm talking to our head of product, Henry, and he tells me that, yeah, AI is going to be just another tool inside of our toolbox, but at Greenhouse, we're not going to use it to make decisions. Like, we're not going to allow AI to make decisions to exclude people in the hiring process. Like, we may use AI to help us write content. We may, use AI to help us increase productivity by allowing us to figure out how do we cast a more wider net to amazing talent in the ecosystem, but we won't use it to exclude people in the hiring process. Like, when I hear stuff like that, I'm like, yeah, I can work with that guy. When I hear my peer and CMO Karen, who talks about like the importance of unlocking people's potential, and she
Mm.
tells us that there has to be fairness in the hiring process, um, and it has to be an equitable process that we're able to tailor to candidates based on what needs they may have. Like, those are the things for me that like stands up. And like, anybody can like say, oh, you can go talk to the CEO or the founders. Like, our founders are amazing, but like, for me, like, I want to go talk to, who did you hire? Like, who are the people that you've like championed and given them the keys to go drive different business objectives across the organization? And so it's like the Henrys, the Karens of the world, that really made a quite the impression for me. And those are the folks that, of many, but those are two that come to mind that are the reason why I'm still here. I think
Yeah.
there's still work for us to do, and I'm excited about the things that we can accomplish as a team. And what we've done in the last year has been somewhat unprecedented from a growth and impact perspective. But the social impact that we're hoping to drive even in the future is going to be even more exciting. So yeah.
It's interesting to hear. You don't often hear about the values part of the conversations that are driving a lot of decisions
Yeah.
that will end up resulting in a product that sits in somebody's hands or in front of their faces on their computer. But to hear AI will not make decisions, it's such a specific either value set, or rationale that does, I think, speak to, yeah, a set of values within the organization. Um, it's cool. You don't often hear that kind of behind the scenes, um, conversation that's going on. Um, so, you join Greenhouse, and you obviously, you've staffed up a team that really take on a broad, I guess, mandate within the organization. How do you sort of decide or see what are the signs that there are different that a different, different initiatives need to be taken on? What are sort of like, I guess, the litmus test for whether an existing approach with how you run people operations or HR or people development is ripe for disruption, needs to be disrupted?
um, listen. Um,
Okay.
I
Yep.
would say first seek to understand, then to be understood. Um, when I listen to the business, we do this thing called Your Voice. It's a survey that happens 4 times a year, and listening to the organization has allowed me to figure out where we can go create impact, where we can be disruptive. My first 100 days, I did 150 proximity sessions,
Wow.
one-on-one sessions. I had met with all of our exec team. I met with 100% of the people team, 100% of the people team. Like they thought I was joking when I was like, I was going to meet with all of them. And I didn't capture their names because I got to meet them as people. So that I got to know what their names were. But what I did capture is their responses. And I aggregated all of that. And then I gave it to one of my good friends who's a data scientist and said, okay, tell me the themes I need to be focusing on. And
Smart.
Serena, you'd be surprised. Like they told me that, hey, we need to prioritize our development. We're so focused on like developing amazing products in the people space that allows other companies to unlock their potential and find amazing candidates. But like, what about ours? What does our growth look like? So we've prioritized development, and I built out a whole people development team that is geared towards that. And I'm excited about Bloom, which is one of the programs that we're having for people managers
Mm.
that is going to allow them to grow and bloom their careers by putting them through this rigorous development process. But it's listening to them. It's finding out that uh, greenhouse attrition typically happens after 4 years.
Mm.
That's also typically where their new hire equity grant it is completed because it's a 4-year vesting cycle. And so when we chose to build a sabbatical program at the 4-year mark, it's not just sabbatical for sabbatical's sake. It's also a retention tool.
Sure.
Um, so just listening to the business and trying to figure out where we can create impact. Right now, I'm super focused on like talent philosophy and
Mm.
like what is that going to look like and how does that tie into our value proposition and what does that look like as we continue to scale across multiple different um, geographies because we scaled to Canada since I've been here. Um, and so, trying to figure out what does that look like has been important, but listening has been, I try to listen more than I talk. And we have a phenomenal person on my team. I call her DC, and she helps drive like the prioritization of what we're trying to accomplish each
Mm.
quarter based on the functional leaders on my people team. And look, newsflash, we're almost completed with the first half of the year, and we're not at 100% of the priorities we said we were going to get done. We're over 50%, but we haven't completed them all. And you know what? I'm excited about that um, because if we set goals that we always achieve, then we set the wrong goals.
Mm.
And so I want the team to be able to say, hey, I didn't burn out. Hey, I don't want to quit this organization. Um, but equally be excited they accomplish 80%, 70% of what we said, and then we'll go back each quarter and we look to see, are these priorities, are they still the priorities, and if they're not, creating space for them to say, no, I want to punt that. I'll punt it into a different quarter, or I'll punt it into next fiscal year. Giving them that liberty, that flexibility, super important. Like um, so yeah, that's how we try to figure out how we're going to continue to create impact for the organization. And so it's
Mm.
more organized than what most people may presume.
Yeah. It sounds really thoughtful and really rigorous. I guess on that topic, what sorts of metrics of success, and I mean that really broadly, not just um, the numbers, but also observable differences, do you look to say, are we being successful here in what we're setting out to achieve?
Oh yeah,
Um,
um, that's a great one. I think there's a couple of them I think that stand out for me that may be like non-traditional. I think from a
Perfect.
people experience perspective, we got into this cycle where we were offering events every month for people to attend because we're a distributed company, right? So we have people that reside in, I believe, 36 different U.S. states. We also have people in Dublin. We also have people in Canada, and so creating these opportunities for people to come together is super important. And so, like, not just seeing the attendance that people would sign up for those events, but like evaluating, hearing from them on like how did the event go, what different behaviors, allyship behaviors did you learn, and then trying to figure out are they still highly collaborative with one another afterwards? Like, do they need a formal event in order to come together? And what we
Hmm.
have found is that's not the case. And those folks have found ways to help us evolve our people experiences. I think that's one of them. I think the second one I would say is from a candidate perspective, how diverse is our pipeline?
Hmm.
So, like, prior to the pandemic, we were sourcing roughly 60% of all hires at Greenhouse. Um, and of course, we have phenomenal tools like sourcing automation that allows us to like cast a wide net. Um, so that's how Daniel, our CEO, found me. Through sourcing automation. So I'm super passionate about it because I was the first exec hire that was used leveraging that particular tool. And we have a phenomenal engineer named Stephen Liu who actually built that tool. So every time I see Stephen, I'm like, yo, you're the reason why I'm here. And he's like, um, but like I try to look at like the importance of representation. So when I got here, 22% of our leadership team were women, and today it's 44%. And so I want to know like if having that type of representation influences who applies to join Greenhouse. Um, our board is roughly, if you exclude our CEO, 67% people of color. So I want to know like, does that influence our pipeline? And Ariana, our head of TP&A, has assured me like, Donald, look at these metrics. Like this is where we were 3 years ago. Like this is where we are now. And the culture for the most part has been an amazing place, but that representation matters, right? So um, that's one metric is like how diverse is your pipeline? If you say inclusion, diversity, equity, and allyship are important, like do you have diverse people that are actively looking to join your organization?
Hmm.
And then I think the third one for me, and this is super important, is like um, I care a lot about retention. And look, I recognize people have to grow sometimes and they grow outside the organization. I have no problem with that. But when we retain people, I want to know like how fulfilled are they? And so in your voice, when that survey goes out and I get to see how fulfilled people are feeling in their current role, that's important to me because that lets me know that like while Serena is here, Serena is doing the best work of her life. And when that fulfillment starts to decline, that's when I know there's some work for me to do. There's some work for our leaders to do to figure out what's going wrong. Is it outside noise? Is it inside noise? Is it outside perspective? Is it inside perspective? Are there better actions we should be taking? Are there actions we should have never taken? Like those are the things that are important to me.
Hmm. Um, I appreciate that, and also those are really specific and, as you said, to some extent, non-traditional measures to be able to look at, creative measures, but that seem really authentic to being able to determine the effectiveness of a lot of the work that you and your team are doing and the organization is doing to receive that change.
Yeah.
Um, let's shift gears a little bit to kind of the external facing part of your work. Now, this is to me, this is really fascinating because it's not something that you hear a lot of chief people officers talk about it. Potentially it's very new, or potentially it's specific to certain types of chief people officers and the fit for them. But what does sort of the external part of your work involve? I want to ask you a couple questions about that.
Yeah. Um, I think the first thing externally is like making sure our customers have the latest and greatest. And it means that sometimes I'll have customers reach out to me and say, hey, we're struggling with this. Can you help me? Um, and it's like almost like an advisory, if you will.
Yeah.
Um, but the great part about that is like being able to see how conversations with their leaders um, and meeting them at their locations and having these types of conversations around um, even things like idea, inclusion, diversity, equity, and allyship, like seeing that shift. And so probably my favorite one recently is Maven Securities, a phenomenal financial company, trading company, um, globally distributed, but major offices in places like Chicago, New York, London, Hong Kong. And talking to their CPO, Rebecca, and their CEO, Ian, about allyship. And they were open about it. They said, listen, diversity is important to us. And 87% of our workplace is men. And so we're worried about the 13%.
Hmm.
What does this environment feel like? And how do we ensure that the 87% serve as like a bridge and a champion and an ally for the 13? And then how do we then improve our numbers as we continue to grow and scale? How do we see greater representation that are non-male? And being able to go there and have that conversation and do that training live in person, and like seeing men leaders come up to me afterwards, like, oh my goodness, like this is what I need to do differently, like da 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 da. I think that's the part of like the external for me that really like helps me like quantify the social impact that
Hmm.
we're making. Um, and there's others like speaking opportunities and providing thought leadership at like so many different conferences or podcasts and things of that nature. But to me, it's like in those moments where someone is telling me they're going to change their default habits, actions, and behaviors. I mean, it's priceless. Like I would do that for free. Like you wouldn't even
Hmm.
have to pay me to see that, because I believe like those micro changes, if we're all making those um, across the planet, like imagine the world we could live in.
Yeah.
So yeah,
But to provide, advice, advisory, and be of service to other companies in your role, I mean, it's such a obviously, it's a very powerful thing. Also seems like kind of a unique thing. I'm curious, was that vision, for you doing that work part of the job description from the start, or what was the insight that sparked this? Who had this insight? How did you start doing this work?
yeah. Um, I will say that the the attraction for me in joining Greenhouse was knowing that this would be an opportunity to create that type of impact. Was it part of the job description? No,
Hmm.
but we do these things called candidate reports. And, the recent candidate report we facilitated said that 76% of all candidates are looking for flexibility.
Hmm.
And when they don't have that, they'll look for new opportunities. And I will say that what I appreciate about our founders and our leadership team is that they give me and my team the flexibility to flex that type of behavior, to flex that type of impact. I think it also helps when you have CEOs that are willing to then contact my CEO and say, "Hey, thank you for allowing us to borrow Donald's time," or "Thank you for allowing us to borrow, Ariana, my head of TP&A, their time," or Jamie Adasi, my head of idea. Like when companies circle back and say, "Hey, thank you," like what it tells me is that Greenhouse is more than just software.
Hmm.
Um, for those companies that identify as just an applicant tracking system, it lets me know we're more than just an applicant tracking system. The impact that we're hoping to create is not just in our product; it's also in our people.
Hmm.
And I tell Henry, our head of product, and John, who's our one of the two co-founders. I tell them this. I say, my goal is that our people would create so much impact in the business world that our thought leadership will ring out so much that the training and advisory that we provide to customers and non-customers, because those are prospects, like um, that it would
Yeah.
resonate so much, Serena, that they'll be like, "OMG, Donald, like thank you," or "OMG, Jamie, thank you," or "OMG, Will, thank you for that leadership that you provided." And these are the nuggets that you said that stuck with me. Like, what company do you work for again? And we'll say Greenhouse, and they'll be like, "Hold on, like the hiring software?" And I'm like, "Yes, I want our people to be more recognizable than our product." And equally, I know Henry and John are focused on making sure our product are more recognizable than our people. And if we do that, that type of positive tension should allow us to really create a rippling effect in business where people are really thinking about their tools that they're using every day differently. And I'll give you an
Mm.
example. It's like there's so many companies, like I don't know of any company today that says diversity doesn't matter, inclusion doesn't matter, we want to be inequitable. Like I don't know any companies that openly say that, right? But when you like peel the layer back and you look at their leadership teams, they're not diverse. And they aren't having a diversity of thought or diversity of perspective. And so my concern with that is what ends up happening is like if those are the people that are building the tools, well, now the tools may not be as inclusive as possible. And so, for us, when you peel back our layer, we can stand up to that test. And so my hope is that people will recognize the impact that our people are making alongside the impact that our product is making.
Yeah, it's like a theory of change that you're enacting in real time in inside of your organization to have ripple effects beyond the um, I guess borders or boundaries of your organization. What do you think this is something that more companies should be doing? More chief people officers who are, almost by their very nature, the nature of the role, people, very people first. Um, I don't know. Would you like to see in 3 years more of this kind of work taking place?
I would. Look, the average person spends 90,000 hours at work before they retire. That equates to about a third of our life. There's also a third that we sleep. And so the last third is where people are getting entertainment, travel, time with children, all of those things in. And so if we're going to spend a third of our life working,
Mhm.
well, we should be very impactful on how do we export um, thought leadership, best practices, differing perspective. And that, look, I'm not the only chief people officer that's out there doing this kind of work. Like I look up to tons of people like Lars Mins at Mercedes, Nickel at IBM, um, Stephanie Kramer at L'Oreal. Like there's a few people that really come to mind that are doing this work. Um, but I want to see more of us. I want to see more of us really embrace this idea of not only demonstrating that commercial leadership acumen inside of the workplace, but also externally. And I see people doing that. Like I see Jennifer Rimling at WPP or Kara Alamano at Lattice. Like I monitor the terrain or the field, if you will, and I'm cheering for those people. Like in my opinion, I'm not in competition with those folks. If anything, I feel like we may have on different jerseys based on where we work, but we're on the same side of history, which is like trying to figure out how do we create positive impact for people because we recognize that people are literally the greatest asset for every business. And so, like, if we can figure out how we can change those environments for them, I'm happy to like say their names, cheer for them, hop on podcasts, whatever I can do to help accelerate what they're doing in the space. But yeah, 3 years from now, I'm hoping that this will become more table stakes as opposed to us being viewed as the exception.
Totally. What then sort of do you see as the most important traits in or acumen for people leaders going forward in order to drive this shift? What should organizations be looking for as they hire or grow their people leaders, or what should people leaders be thinking about themselves as they self select into roles like these?
Yeah, I think agility is going to be important, right? Because we still have to do the day to day, the X's and O's, right? I still got to
Yep.
make sure people, when people like yesterday, I had a leader reach out to me and they needed a tax form. They're like, look, I don't have my tax form. My accountant's asking for my tax form. So the basic blocking and tackling of being on a people team, those things still have to occur. People still want payroll to run on time.
Yep.
Um, People still expect their insurance IDs to work when they have to go take Jane or Johnny to the pediatrician. So those things still have to occur. But the agility, like throughout the day, like I think those things have to be curated. We have to create opportunities to give people exposure to how they can do basic blocking and tackling, but also how do they create impact from like an advisory consultative perspective. And I think those things only come with legit experience. You have to give people the opportunity to experience that on a day-to-day basis. I think agility is going to be important though. I think things like empathy are going to be important. Like, I think gone are the days where people teams can no longer get away with not empathizing with the struggles and the headwinds that the business is having. And so like we should have our team sitting on earnings calls. They
Hmm.
should understand the importance of EBITDA. They should understand the importance of burn rate. They should understand these financial metrics that influence the day-to-day growth and health of the business. And so like our teams get that download, the business of the business. They got to know what that looks like. And then I think the last one is going to be like transparency and trust. Like this idea that we get it right all the time, it's not true. And so like, when I fall, like I want people to know, like, hey, I fell. So I talk about the times where, I wrote out a policy and effectively I had spinach in my teeth. And I've had a leader pull me to the side, like my buddy Trenton, and he'll say, hey, dude, like, I know you have good intentions. There's spinach in your teeth. Like, I'm like, yeah, thank you. Tell me, like, what do we need to do to make sure that the policy lands where it needs to do? So, uh, probably the biggest one I'll tell you is around like, you've heard me talk about the sabbatical program, but when we rolled out sabbatical 2.0, only 85% of the organization was excited. More tenured people, that 15% that were plus 4 years, they weren't excited because the old policy allowed people to have sabbaticals at 7 years. And so they were like, look, if we um, forecast this out, new hires would actually get more sabbatical days than us at like year 12 or year 15. So we were like, thank you. And then 30 days later, I came back and I was like, hey, this is sabbatical 2.1. And people were like, what? And I was like, yeah, like we messed up, had spinach in my teeth. And so, like, I think it's not celebrating failure, but it is like creating space for people to fail. And I think that comes with like trust and transparency, allowing the business to know that they can trust me to know that if it's not done right, you can speak up, because I know leaders who say they have an open door policy, but nobody walks through that door.
Hmm.
And so I always want people to feel comfortable walking through, my proverbial door. Like, tell me where there's opportunities for us to improve. I'm on it. Let me know. So yeah,
I mean, I would imagine too, if you are trying to cultivate an organization that is growth minded, that being able to demonstrate that you can also fail and what that means, that you can get up and you can iterate through it or you can recover, is probably a really powerful message to be able to role model for people as well.
absolutely.
Um, so now I know we only have a couple minutes left, but in a previous conversation, you had left me so inspired by talking to me a little bit about your theory of leadership. And you had mentioned to me something about, um, you know, great leaders being people who are able to bring more oxygen into the room, or I'll let you put it into your own words, but and that you are working to try to cultivate that inside of your organization today. I guess as a final note, would you leave us with a description of what you mean by that, and then also why it's important and how you start helping people cultivate that inside of their own organizations?
Yeah, Serena, that's a good one. I think so many businesses are squandering the potential of the people inside of their organization. And the reason why I say that is because those environments often are suffocating. They're not able to be as creative. They're not able to be speak up and voice where they see opportunities for the business to make different decisions or to go down different paths. Um, those environments are not conducive for ideation and creativity. And so you have people, because they have bills and they have families that they have to provide for, they show up every day, but you're not getting the best version of them. The environment itself is a suffocating environment. And I believe that there are leaders in the world that bring oxygen to the rooms that they walk in, that allow people to be seen, valued, and heard, who create spaces where others feel like they can be creative, where they can speak up, where they can ideate and offer a different voice or a different perspective. And my hope in business is not to make the most money. Um, my hope in business is to create the most oxygen, to elevate those leaders that can walk into those spaces and literally change the dynamics for people who are just waiting to give you their full potential, but they feel like they can't because the environment itself is suffocating. And so, yeah, in everything that I do, my hope is that I can walk into each room and everyone is seen, valued, and heard. That I'm creating so much oxygen and the people around me are creating so much oxygen that people are like, OMG, I could totally breathe here. I never want to leave. And probably the greatest story that I have around that is um, the last reduction in force or layoff that I had to facilitate was not easy. Like, they never get easy. Um, but there was a gentleman that was on the team who emailed me. And effectively, what he told me was like, the hardest part about me leaving the organization is not like how disruptive it's going to be to my livelihood or finding a new job or even the job search or process. That's not going to be the hardest part. That's going to be hard, but that's not the hardest part. The hardest part is that because he knew he was a recent father, it's like the hardest part will be that I know I may have to end up in an organization that's a suffocating environment. And I've been on your team and I've had so much oxygen. That's going to be the hardest part. Um, and I forwarded it to my CEO because I was like, that one hurt. That one hurt. So, yeah, making sure that we can create that level of oxygen for others, I think is important. And so, like, that's why I try to make sure I put the leaders on the pedestal that do that, even other CPOs that are doing that. I think it's important because if they don't land at my organization, I hope that they land at theirs. Um, Once you experience that in the workplace, once you've had a leader that has created that for you, and I've been very fortunate to have leaders that have created oxygen for me in the workplace, there's nothing like it. Like, you never want to go to an environment again that you can't breathe. So, um, yeah, that's what I would leave you with.
That's Donald, I thank you for, you're leaving with that same inspired feeling, as from our last conversation. I really appreciate you chatting with me today, and I have learned a lot. I imagine other people will really learn a lot from listening to this and sitting with some of your suggestions and some of the work that you're doing. And I look forward to experiencing and seeing more of the impact that you are able to have in your work. So thank
Awesome.
you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you, Serena. Thank you for having me.
Of course.